and I'm assuming everyone can see the screen. And I'm just trying to work out the best way for me to see people's chat while I'm in Google Slides.
It's not an easy one if you're viewing, sharing your screen as well. So I can keep an eye on the chat for you, if that's helpful.
Manage the chat, that'd be fantastic. Great.
Sure thing.
Great. All right then, well, let's get started. Thank you. There's about 10 of us on at the moment, and as, there it is. Okay, cool. As others join us, we will do our best to loop them in. Fantastic. Well, this is webinar 2. It's actually the 3rd time we've gathered together, but this is webinar 2 after the introductory one, and we're focusing on corporate innovation. This is really, really important opportunity because commercial organisations represent fantastic business for us as social enterprises. They are more and more interested in the tagline that TDI talks about, do good, make money. And we have a skill set that they're looking for. We have a connection into social change that they're looking for, and they make brilliant customers. So it can be a little bit scary to get started if you're not familiar with the world of commercial organisations, but yeah, it's really worth doing. So let's get into it. So I think everyone is working well there with mute. Decide if you want to be on video or not. Type your questions into the chat function, and I'll just empower Will to make sure he speaks up when we're doing that. And as you all know, this is being recorded. So today, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about commercial and corporate organisations for a little bit. Then we're going to focus on just different offerings to them. So really, this next chunk of time is just different ideas and different ways of offering something to commercial organisations: training, startup surveys and scouting, incubation and acceleration, venture building. So they're the topics that we're going to cover, but they're different ways really of engaging corporates as customers. So who is the customer and where do you find them? So I noticed that Keith mentioned this in the first week, that it's a really great idea to start with the large global corporations. They may already be looking for you. So start with the globals. They are in one country or more. They are probably working with social enterprises. They probably have a developed CSR function, which stands for corporate social responsibility. And then you can teach local businesses, family businesses, as you start to hit your straps and as they see change through the global corporations. You might want to have a think about them in terms of sectors. So there might be sector-specific knowledge that you need to develop, and rather than a scattergun effect, you might look at financial services like banking and insurance. You might look at tech firms and communication firms. You might look at mining and other extraction resourcing companies might be very big in your part of the world, or manufacturing might be very big in your part of the world, or even tourism. So we'll give some examples from those worlds. And at the moment, TDI is either helping accelerators who are working with all of those groups, or is working directly with corporates in those groups. So we've got some very real experience we can share with you. So how do you get in? The first thing I want you to have a think about is not only to think about your customer, but think about your customer inside the customer. With a group that we're working with in PNG right now, we're helping them think about 3 customers inside their customer. So they're working with all corporates only, and they're working with corporates in financial services, extraction, tourism, and hospitality is their 4th area. They have 3 customers inside the customer. So the first one is the CEO who's passionate about the cause that this organisation stands for, but is not involved in the day-to-day. So that's a customer they aim for in their value proposition, in their channels, in their customer relationship. Another customer is the GM of HR or CSR, corporate social responsibility, just remember that stands for, and may or may not be interested. So sometimes they know the pitch is about compliance, sometimes the pitch is about their passion and change the world. And then their third customer inside the customer is actually the passionate leader, agitator, who might be a more junior manager, but is really keen to align with them and is able to influence inside the organisation. So think about your customers, think about the sector or some demographic information about them, and then think about the exact person inside your organisation who is the customer inside the customer. So then you want to have a think about meet these people, get inside the organisation. So if they're an organisation that has a corporate social responsibility department, or even one person with that title, that's the person you phone and you ask for a coffee. And you can, rather than present your stuff, you can say, we're a social enterprise accelerator, here's what we do, here are the opportunities we're looking for. Where do you suggest we look? Who do you work with? What kind of problems are you trying to solve? What kind of partnerships do you do? And rather than go directly to them for business, what we do at TDI all the time is we contact organisations and ask for their advice on how to get into the sector. And then as we explain who we are, they often will take it further and say, well, here's our CSR, here's the problems we're trying to solve, you know, what might you have to offer us? So you can do that through CSR. As we talk about the products that you offer, human resources or even a strategy person might be a better entry point. So strategy could sit in a division called corporate development. It might be something that sits alongside or reports directly into the CEO. So you can offer them something specific. You can call them and ask for advice. Ask for 30 minutes of their time and stick to that. The other thing that you can do is go where they gather naturally. So that could be at certain conferences, have a think about the publications, their professional networks, have a think about how you want to tag yourself on LinkedIn and how you want to use something like that. Or you might be able to link community via a donor. So this might be, you know, a bilateral donor like a DFAT or a USAID, be a managing contractor that you're in touch with. It could be someone who is a private or a foundation who's already set you up. I know a lot of you do have that kind of support. So go back to them and say, who do you know? And of course, just generally working your networks. So what I thought we'd actually do is share our experience here, because if I flick back to this slide, I suspect quite a few of you may have your own experiences of this. So I can see a few more participants have joined us, and I think I can probably, yeah, no, I can't see the chat. So Will, I might just throw to you. I'd love it if people either on chat or by, if you've got a strong connection that you don't think will drop out, if you go off mute, and just share some of the experiences that you've had finding and connecting to commercial and corporate customers. Love to hear from you guys. And Will, if you could just share what people are typing.
No questions racing through as yet, Liv, or stories, I should say.
Well, while people are typing, Will, do you have one or two that you'd like to share? So if you go online, guys, and later I'll talk about this called Yumi, but we work with Carnival Cruise Line and DFAT. And DFAT actually, no, we were at a conference, we were at drinks, and over drinks we started talking with Carnival. And that then led to a conversation with people we knew at DFAT, and the whole thing took a couple of months to get set up. So that's one for us. But DFAT have connected us to many corporates.
Oh, sorry, dive in.
No, go ahead, Will, and then I'll ask Liv a question.
Sure, Keith. I was going to say, I love how these connections or collaborations can be traced back to a social event more often than not. A drinks or a conference or something. We at Second Muse have done a lot of work with Nike and Intel in particular. And we've run challenges for them focused on problems that they're facing in their supply chain. And so that's been one of the ways that we've fostered the practice of running innovation challenges, but running them around really specific challenges that a corporate is facing. And so that it's both related to their supply chain, but it's also in part CSR, because we've been looking at social or inclusive businesses that can address problems in their supply chains.
Fantastic. So thanks, Will. We'll make sure that we hear that. If you're willing to share that in a little bit more depth later, that'd be great. Keith, were you going to ask me something? Welcome, Keith, from Madrid at 6 a.m.
Hey, everybody. Liv, the question that I was going to ask you is, you talked about this introduction that you were given, and then a few months later, you started to work with them. Maybe it would be, I personally would love to hear, how did those couple of months unfold? So what happened from that first introduction to when you started working together, and how did you guys kind of work that conversation?
Yeah, great. And I would say right now there's 2 corporates that we're on the journey with, and we're currently, I think we've got about 4 or 5 corporates that we're working with. And we find it's really similar every time. For us, it is usually somehow we find that customer inside the customer at a conference or some kind of event. We sit next to them, or we're chatting with them, having a drink. Sometimes people connect us by word of mouth. Hey, you've really got to meet so-and-so, and we have a meeting. And we just talk about ideas. And then a week later, we would probably just call or email and say, great to meet you. You know, we talked about lots of crazy ideas. Would you like to take any of them further? And corporates are really busy. Often we find a month goes by, and eventually, you know, we'll connect up, talk further, take a few action points, make some phone calls if we then want to work with another partner, like a DFAT or a foundation. Have a few calls with them. By now, another month has gone by, and then there's usually a meeting of the 2 or 3 groups, and actually that first design conversation. And then it really depends on who's offering what, if we've got all the resources we need at the table, or if we need to add in another partner. So one of the things that we're working on with Indigenous Australians as the beneficiary actually is looking like having 4 of us, 2 corporates, 1 authority, and ourselves, all grouping together to focus on one particular problem in one area of Australia, working with Indigenous Australians. So it probably takes 3 months of phone calls, emails, a bit of that hustle to get everyone to the table. And then you have a couple of design meetings, then you write a proposal. And it depends, especially if government is in the mix, we find it can be, you know, lots of to and froing to actually get the contract written after design. So it can be, we wouldn't have signed one in less than 2 months. And sometimes we're just finishing one now that's going to be in PNG that is 3 of us in partnership, and that's taken 7 months. So don't give up.
Yeah, great sharing, great sharing. Min asked a question, or she shared in chat. So thank you, Min, from Hanoi. We started with corporates by training innovation for them, but we have not really utilized the opportunities to push farther, to go with them into more corporate innovation. Should we start with a proposal or ask for advice from the training department?
Oh, Min, so that's really great. So you've started with training. Would you mind typing in sort of what's the training that you've been doing? Because my question would be, say in PNG, one of the groups we're working with starts with training in corporates. It's around domestic violence and then gender equality. So then they've got more to offer. They've got women in leadership, and then they look to talk to corporates around, why don't you join us in shared value with accelerators elsewhere. So they've got more training they can offer, and then they offer a shared value project offering. So Keith, do you have what the training is? Is it something that leads on in a conversation, or is it?
Yeah, just waiting for Min to respond to that question. Oh, Min's going to come off of mute. Thanks, Min.
Hi, everyone. In fact, can you hear me clearly?
Yes.
That's great. In fact, what we have really do the training for them was about design thinking and lean startup methodologies for inner innovation for their project teams. I think it's a great start, but in fact, we did propose to them several activities further than training, because we know that training is not enough. We suggest them with I mean, training for their teams so that they can, I mean, help the innovation teams to push further with their projects. But in fact, we received no feedbacks. So with this session with you, I might think of, I mean, get back to them again, but I'm not sure whether I should start with the training department, because normally the training department will say, well, this is the job of some other parts of the company more than our department only. And the other feedback sometimes we get is that, well, we just want to do a training to change the mindset of people. We don't not yet ready to go further with kind of innovation, something like that. So
Yeah,
really,
yeah.
yeah, look forward to your, I mean, experience.
Yeah. So, Min, firstly, as soon as you're in the door with training, start looking for that customer within the customer who's a champion for you, or we call them the agitator, who loves what you're doing, who says, wow, it'd be fantastic if we got things happening in this organisation like that. If they're coming to innovation training, they're likely to be there, and look for the most senior one. Because if you're talking to the training department and they're like, oh yeah, we just want to train people, you just want to work out, is it because those trainers want to see their company become innovative, or because they've been told to? So you're looking for the people who are passionate, because otherwise what happens in all large businesses is they're just like, yeah, thanks very much. So you want to find the person who's passionate, who says, yes, come and, you know, I will pick up the phone, I will make it happen internally. Or you want to find the person who their pains are so much that they're sort of saying, please come and do this, because otherwise I'm going to fail at my job. And so the people who are just a bit lukewarm are the hardest to work with. If someone's saying, you know, we want to change mindset, I think you just keep having conversations with them around, well, look, action is actually the pathway to changing true mindset. People think that if you just give people new ideas, it changes their mindset, but most of us need to be shown. So the conversation to go back to them and have is, so the next step is with people, why don't we do an ideation kind of process next? And then you can start to break down the skills and the teaching that you have in your accelerator curriculum and just keep offering it. But don't be disheartened, just keep finding ways to keep the conversation going, either with those trainers or with different people inside the organisation. So, you know, how's it going with shifting the mindset? You know, in our experience, actually, running a small pilot, actually crystallizing and getting some ideas, getting a small budget behind them is actually what will change mindset so much faster. I don't know if Keith or Will, if you'd like to add anything in there.
Yeah, I'll jump in, and then Will, for you, for sure the same. I think Liv has described it perfectly in that when you go in and do training, and so Min, fantastic that you had an opportunity to do that. Once you do the training, the most important thing is to ask the questions, right? So who asked for this? Who is driving it? Why are you doing it? Tell us about some of your goals and objectives. The key is that you want to ask a lot of questions to understand context, understand that ownership. So who's the customer within the customer, so that when you do in fact make an offer, whether it is for a pilot or for a challenge or anything else in between, that you're actually just responding to what they want. I think it's very common for all of us to go in and say, hey, we've done training, now we can offer you this. But the important part is to ask those questions up front, build the relationship, build the trust, because doing innovation in a corporate is taking risk, and corporates aren't really designed by nature to take risk. And so you want to build trust by asking those questions, building the relationship, and then making the offer, as Liv just gave an example, by kind of talking it through and then maybe suggesting a pilot or something like that. So maybe I'll throw it over to Will and you can add.
Yeah, I mean, I'd echo your affirmation, Keith, that I think you really nailed it, Liv. And I think it is very much about understanding the customer within the corporate, but I think also the other side of it is, we talked about it as pain points, but at the end of the day, you're looking for a problem to solve for them, right? So I think looking for that, the way in which your innovation process, maybe even your cohorts, might address a problem that is being faced. So pain points, or in, the other framing for that would be, a problem that you might be able to support them to solve. But I think that like the extent to which you're able to move through this process is very much mirrored by the amount that you understand their problem and the quality of the relationship that you have with the person that's going to sell it into the corporate as well. So I think those are the two things to focus on: the understanding and the relationship.
Which is why, guys, going back to the start, I think you might find if you focus on certain sectors, like always be happy if you draw in another customer, but the more you focus on certain sectors, you will see strongly repeated patterns and problems that you can work with. And eventually you'll get corporates approaching you from that sector saying, I hear you've done this training with 2 others. So given that Min raised training, let's go there now. We heard that she was doing some innovation and ideation training, which is fantastic. So here's a couple, and they're probably all things that you're aware of. Issue-based policy development and training. This may really dovetail with the social issue more of some of the organisations that you're working with, and not necessarily your own. Accelerator, innovation and ideation, design thinking, Scrum training. The way I'd approach it is, as you just go out, set yourselves and your team over 3 months, so that's 12 weeks. If every team member at least once a fortnight has a conversation with someone at some level inside a commercial organisation that you would like to work with, at the end of those 12 weeks, get together and think about the problems that they have. Think about all those powerful questions that Keith gave you that you would ask. And then think about your curriculum and how close it is to doing the jobs that they need, taking away the pains that they've expressed, and delivering the gains that they hope for. And what you might find is you've got a lot of curriculum that's nearly ready to go that you can just tweak into a kind of training interactive offering that goes to the heart of some of those conversations. So I think those things are pretty straightforward. And what I just thought I'd do is, I imagine that there is a fair bit of skill and experience amongst you. So I just thought this might be another opportunity. We've heard from Min, but I just wondered if anyone else, and Keith and Will as well, wanted to share the training opportunities that they've had with corporates. This is a fairly common way in. So I love to hear the wisdom.
Just quickly before we dive into another round of sharing, there was a question from Julie in Thailand, I believe, which is, do you charge for a pilot? Maybe could you expand on the question, Julie, or is that clear to you, Liv?
No, that's clear to me. Well, I'll have a go at answering it. We often make discount offers on firsts because we might say, we've taught it in this context, but not another. We're fairly transparent and authentic and honest with our clients. And so we will say, we're doing this for the first time in this particular context. And so there is a discount. We would always charge. We at the Difference Incubator are a fee-for-service social enterprise. Currently, we have no philanthropic support at all. And so we absolutely always charge something unless we're very clear that it's a loss lead. But we usually do discounts so that we can then do a lot more back and forward with them as the pilot is going. So we name it up front. Yep, this is a pilot, or this is the second time we've done this, and then it gives us a much richer learning experience. So if anyone does have another training example, and possibly if you're willing to come off mute and share it, and if your signal's strong enough, and we'd love to hear how you landed that business as well, because that's probably the big difficult thing for people.
From Rise Impact, and I'm from Thailand, by the way. So we have occasionally corporate innovation jobs, and mostly we got it from the referral. So it's for us, I think now it's 0% that we suppose we meet a new person and we catch up over a coffee, and a month later they disappeared. And so like the connection, like from zero, we don't have that kind of work yet. But most of the corporate innovation workshop or challenge that we run for the corporate clients, we got it from referral, and people who attended the previous one recommended to another subunit in the same like big company, for example. And mostly they are very interested in design thinking and lean. And actually we talked in the team that we are interested to move into corporate social innovation, but it's hard to come to that. Like even the clients that we used to work with for maybe 2 years in a row, it's hard to like move them a little bit further toward sustainability. So mostly it's just focused on innovation, but our team just, even though it's like generate revenue stream, but we also want to, also work with them and then shape them towards sustainability as well. But it's still far from that now.
Okay. So Julie, thank you so much. I just want to engage with a couple of things, and then we'll get someone else also to share. But you said some fantastic things there I just want to pick up on. So remember what we were talking about is when you go and talk with people, you want to listen, and it's all about their problem, not what you want to bring. But if you are saying, hey, we do want to start to get into social innovation, we do want to move more from the training into something else, then what you're embarking on is really what we call consciousness raising or inspiration or whatever it is. And so then you might need to put on what we would put on a thought leadership lunch. We would put on something like that. We'd say CEOs only, or that senior executive group. And we'd put on something really swish, and we'd have a very inspirational speaker and then table conversation. Last time when we did this last year, we gave some people pre-reading, and people flew from all around Australia to be part of it. So if you really want to move the conversation and are looking to have a different offering because you really want to push corporates to do more, then you've got to do some consciousness raising and a whole lot of things like that. And you've got to make sure that you're talking to the right level of seniority who's got the budget for it. And then that tells you the kind of event you need to run to get those people in the room. Now, Hien, did I see that someone else was going to share on the training they're doing? I'll open that back up for anyone who wants to do that.
Sorry, Liv, I was totally broken a few minutes ago. I have to switch the into my phone, so I didn't really catch the whole thing. So just keep going, and I try to catch up.
Okay, Hien, great to have you back. Anyone else want to share about training they've delivered, and especially how they got those first couple of contracts? Okay, I'm going to keep going. Okay, so I will start by talking about this, and then Keith, I'll hand over to you. Is that okay?
That sounds great. Thank you.
Great. So we're talking about now offering them something in that startup world where they're really thinking about a problem they're trying to solve, and they do want to get involved in growing a business, changing their supply chain, their supply chain, or something like that. So for us, this might be, you know, a whole ideation process. We might throw to Will for that in a minute. But we use the business model canvas. You might use something different, but you really want to do just some early business modeling with information that you have in the room, and then you want to go and test it outside the room. So what we do is we do customer empathy interviews. And these are interviews that are asking some of those questions that Keith raised, but taking it back even a further step. So you do not say, when you're working alongside this corporate to explore the landscape around the idea they have, that they're wanting to start up something, and you're going and looking for the potential customers of that new thing that you're starting up together. The first thing you do when you're talking to customers is you don't present your products, you don't present your services, you don't present anything like that at all. You listen to them. And so you ask questions about their lives, you ask questions about the work they're doing, and we call these empathy interviews. And so you build a very nuanced picture of who they are, the jobs they want done, the problems they have, the gains. You'll hear me use those words over and over again, focused around what you think this startup is going to be and who you think the customer might be, but you're not yet offering any products or services. And then out of those interviews, then you start to understand what the value might be. At the same time, when you've got a startup, you have to look out at the landscape and do what Keith talks about to find the white space. You have to look at what's the actual size of this market. Are a lot of people wanting a product like this? And if so, is there already lots of competition? Or is it only a few people really want this idea, this product or service, as much as we can tell early on? And if so, it needs to be expensive, or those customers need to buy a lot of them. So you really need to understand the market size, how many, how much, how often, those kind of things. And then you also need to understand the competition. Who's already offering something, not just that's the same or might be the same as your idea, but you actually also need to say, how else could they spend their money? Let me give you a really quick and obvious example. If I'm going out with my family tonight, I could go and see a movie, or we could go to a virtual reality arcade, which is something that we do, or we could go for a walk by the river for free, or we could hire rollerblades and go for a blade by the river. So those three things are competitors for family entertainment, but they're not just movie houses. So when you're thinking market size and competition, you have to think a little bit more creatively to understand what the true competition is. Just as when you're doing customer empathy interviews, you have to be much more creative than just asking questions about a product that you think you might build. And finally, when you've got all of that information, only then do you start to design your products and services. So Keith, why don't I hand over to you and tell me when you want the next slide.
Yeah, sounds great. Thank you. So one thing I want to highlight to everyone based on what Liv shared is that it's that last point that she made, which is that human nature desires choice, right? So in Liv's case, if she came home tonight and said, hey, everybody, let's do something together. And everybody's like, great idea. And she's like, great, your choice is movie and nothing else, right? And so then people will be like, well, what if I don't really want to watch a movie? And so the important part in putting forth options to the customer is to remember that customers prefer choice. And so this is true for your clients. So for the corporate clients, their customers prefer choice. It is especially true for your own clients, which are the corporates. They also prefer choice. And so every time you go to a corporate as a part of this process, just make sure that based on what you hear of their needs, that you're actually suggesting 2 or 3 options to make sure that you give them the power of choice. So within startup surveys and scouting, the important part is to really fully understand first the corporate and what their objectives are in the startup surveys and scouting. And then the second one, of course, is to understand the ultimate needs of the customer, whether it's the purchasing department, if it's a supply chain problem that they're trying to solve, or if it's actually something more customer facing. So Liv, maybe I'll get you to pop over to the next slide. And the example that I'll give you is actually with a Canadian mobile phone company or telecommunications company. And this Canadian company decided that as a part of their long-term strategy, they wanted to really dig deeper into the mobile health space. There's a few reasons for that. As they started to do the customer empathy interviews, what they started to realize is that in Canada, there's an aging population. Their customers were starting to think more and more about their long-term health and their health as an aging population. And they believed and still believe that part of that solution would need to come through their mobile phone. And so that really was kind of the driving force behind this. And so then the process with that telecommunications company was to actually go out into the marketplace and to look for startups, so early stage businesses that were addressing some of those mobile health questions. Now, it is important for you guys to hear this. As a part of this process, initially they said very clearly that they wanted to work with Canadian early stage companies. So they had a national focus for the type of research that they wanted us to do. And as a part of that outcome, what the reality was for them is there were not enough mobile health startups in Canada to solve the problems they were looking for. So the geographic mandate changed from nationally to regionally. So they were willing to look across, at least initially, Canada, US, and Mexico as a platform to then say, you know, if let's try and find all the solutions we're looking for in a regional context, not just a single country. In their particular case, as a part of this exercise, they did not know how they wanted to partner with these organizations. So the premise behind this was first find those early stage companies, and then second of all, as you identify what stage they're at, then the next question was like, what is the best way to partner? Partner could be license their product or service or purchase it. The second one was to come up with a more strategic partnership. And then the third one, of course, could be to acquire. Interestingly enough, in their case, they actually have done a little bit of everything. They've decided to keep it open-ended, where sometimes they will license, sometimes they will strategically partner. They have also invested without acquiring, and they have acquired. But what I will tell you is their first step was actually to license the company's product as a way to get comfortable with the notion of working with a startup. And then since that time, they have added these other pieces. So think a little bit about that sequence. And so the important part in this process is that when businesses are looking for, they're looking for startups to help them. And I'll maybe reference one of Will's examples, which was Nike. And maybe they were looking for help with their supply chain. Supply chain companies could be service-based companies, they could be software-based companies, they could be hardware-based companies. So it can really cover the spectrum of different types of startups. And in other cases, it might be very specific and narrow. But the important part in this is it does require you to gain experience and to have experience in finding startups. How do you find them? Where do you find them? How do you evaluate them for the fit and for the needs? And then lastly, how do you present them into the corporate so that they know what to do with them and how? So maybe what I'll do is I'll pause here, and then Liv, you may have some questions on what I just shared, or Will may also have an extension to what I shared.
Yeah, Will, please either share about Nike and Intel now, or when we go on to incubation. I'm not sure where it fits best, but we absolutely want to hear those things. So Will, over to you, whether it's now or later, and also if anyone is wanting to type any questions or anything around this area.
Yeah, look, happy to jump in now. I think in both of those cases, they were in fact looking across the whole range of portfolio, the whole portfolio of corporate engagement of SecuMuse. It is all relational. Like there are connections back from certain people in the company and the previous roles that they held at companies like Nike and Intel. That's been one of the critical ways that we've been able to sell work into those is off the back of existing relationships and deep understanding of the challenges that those companies are facing. But the approach that we've taken has always been at I guess, a bit of an overlap between the new business team and CSR, because we're entirely focused on social enterprises or inclusive businesses. We're looking for the sweet spot at really the overlap between those. Unfortunately, you'll often get yourself stuck in some organizational politics if you try to bring teams together. And so I think that the focal point for all of that work has been trying to find the champion, first of all. You've covered that already, Liv. But I think in both, I actually, with all of our corporate work, it's ranged from leaning more towards CSR, so looking at businesses that maybe aren't actually solving a direct problem for this particular corporate, but they're in the same general field of business, and so in that case it's more of a CSR play. I think sourcing those sorts of businesses is one value proposition. The other, as you suggested, Keith, is actually brokering the partnerships, and then on the other side, there's more like particular identification of a problem and sourcing of businesses or innovators to solve a particular problem. So some of the work we've done with Nike has really been around material science. So it's actually helping them to engage more broadly the field of innovators as opposed to just social businesses, and then looking for and then working with them to try to assess the validity of some of those material innovations into their product line as well. So it's ranged from businesses and more CSR leaning through to much more specific technological and related to business. So, but I think one point to call out from what you were sharing, Keith, is I think mobile technology companies are a really interesting proposition here. They are often really active in this space. Like how many products, there's very little barrier to entry when it comes to app-based services or products. And many of them, like Telenor, like Grameen Phone, I mean, you look at an organization like GSMA, which is an association of a range of different mobile providers. They are really, really active in the inclusive business and social enterprise space. So that might be one particular subset of corporates that would be interesting to approach in your respective markets.
Right. Thanks, Will. And look, I'll just pick up on two things Will said. It's all relational and existing relationships and deep understanding of the problems they face. So this is going to take time. It's going to take finding all kinds of ways to genuinely connect. It's really going to take an attitude that you care and you want to understand the problems they're facing. And this is a medium term play, unless you're already well connected in. So don't give up quickly. So moving on really just to talk about incubation, I thought we'd talk about really that early stage time, whether it's internal or external, is really just part of the conversation with the corporate. It really depends on what it is. So I've just said that down the bottom, and again, you know, happy for Keith or Will to chip in with their experience. But when you're talking with them, is it something that's clearly in the supply chain? Is it something that needs to come inside the corporate organisation? Is it something that together with the corporate organisation you're facing a problem out in the world, and so it's going to be something that's quite separate to that corporate and doesn't change that corporate? So it really just depends on what is the product or service. Is there a match on skills, market and customer? What's the risk appetite of the corporate? How will it be governed? All of these things, you know, really tell you the answer as to whether you're working on something inside the organisation with intrapreneurs and existing staff, or whether together you're establishing something quite separate. They may only give money to it. They may give pro bono time to it. It might be something quite different. So Keith or Will, is there anything else you'd add there about, you know, when it's internal, when it's external?
The comment that I would make to that, thanks Liv, is that I find very often it's both a combination of their culture as well as their goals and objectives. So for example, the Canadian telecommunications company that I described earlier, they actually believe that culturally they don't have the capacity internally to innovate in the way that other people can innovate. And so, so for them, it has to be external when they do something like this. But in other cases, people do want to either protect the IP, the intellectual property, keep it in-house, or they actually do want to drive that culture change that Min was referring to earlier. So that would be my experience, and we'll throw it over to you.
Yeah, great. So there's a number of steps here that may be very familiar to you, and in a minute I'll go on to an example. Will, Keith and I have all been talking about help them articulate the problems or the opportunities that they have. This is the power of the question, and you just need to keep growing in your skill around asking, engaging, insightful questions, and questions that lead on. And you'll develop that skill more and more over time, and you really notice the difference between someone who's got a list of questions and they're asking them, and it's really quite tiring for the person that they're talking with, versus questions that lead into more and more dialogue, more and more excitement. Could someone just mute there? There's someone who's got some activity in the background. If they could just mute their audio.
Sorry, that was Keith. Sorry, I came off of mute because Min asked a question.
Oh, okay. Question, yep. Far away.
Yeah. The question is, if it is convenient, could you share your experience in pricing such a service as this? So maybe between yourself and Will, if you guys want to talk about how you price this in the past.
Yep. Yeah.
And some of the considerations and factors. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Good question. Big question. Help them articulate the problems. Then you go into some kind of ideation process, and hopefully all of you as accelerators have a whole lot of tools that you use to get the ideas flowing, and then to select. So that's really just points 2 and 3. And then you want to take what it is that you've got and start to crystallize it. So I talk about crystallizing, piloting, prototyping, and then performing. So, you know, piloting and prototyping, you might just keep it as one, but really you want to crystallize it. And this has to be what I call out of the room work. You must get facts and data on market. You must have facts and data on competition. You must have deep customer understanding. You really want to test things, and you really have to be able to answer everything with a piece of information that is not your idea and is not the idea of someone on your team. It has to be data and information that's come to you from the wider world. And that's really important. And so many mistakes happen because that crystallizing isn't done, and you have to be ruthless. You have to throw out idea after idea after idea and keep designing before you pilot. So the more you do it before you invest in a pilot, the more money you'll save and the faster you'll go later. But of course, don't stay in design too long. Get into action, do a pilot, learn quickly, short sprints, keep doing it. And then when you feel you've got the whole ready to go, that's what I'd call prototyping. When you're much further along, and then after prototyping might be duplication, triplication, and then some further scale into performance if it's something that's going to grow that way, or scale through more customers depending on what the scaling is. So I imagine that you will have steps and processes like this. It's really just the same. So I might go on to an example unless anyone's asking a question about the process.
Nothing coming through, Liv.
Right, I'll go on to, so this is a disability services provider in Australia. I'll just call them G because I haven't actually had time to ask their permission to use it. So this was internal incubation. So this not-for-profit, actually, disability services provider approached us. And the first thing that we sold them was we had 3 conversations. So there was a telephone call, there was a range of emails, there was another telephone call. Then we met in person twice, I think, asking questions, talking, getting back to them. And then we ran a 3-day, what we call Explore, which was all about the problems that they see people with a disability facing, that they want to solve, all about the market, the competition. We did that really in-depth look and came up with a range of ideas through an ideation process. In that ideation process, we had people with a disability in the room with us. We had employers because we'd come up with a key idea around employment. We had staff from the organisation. We also had a training organisation. So we had a range of skills people in the room who were either from their passion because it's their life or because it might be future business. So we tried to find the gold that's in them, and at this point we're just really facilitators. It's all about what they know. It's all about the skills that they have and how do you find that. So we developed a model around technology that was going to be in-house training for this disability services provider with support from a training organisation. They were also establishing and have established a small social enterprise that creates certain apps and supports those apps. And then there was a pathway to external employment for people with a disability. So for that disability services provider, there are 2 things that they are now running that they weren't running before. A training program that people with a disability pay for from an insurance system in Australia that's really enabled people with a disability to have a lot more choice and freedom. And then that disability services provider itself has created a small social enterprise in the technology space. So it can be the first employer. And then after that, the people move through being employed by that social enterprise. and then go on to external employment. So it's about 3 years old. It's got all kinds of problems still. It sounds fantastic. It sounds like it just happened. They've got marketing work still to do to get to the right people. They've got to refine their training to focus it more on what the employers need. They've got to develop the capability of the social enterprise. They've developed one app so far, and they can employ only a handful of people. And they still have to test the capacity of the people when they finish working in the social enterprise and how well they fit into some of the ongoing employment that might be offered after that. So there's lots of work still to do, but at the end of 3 years, they've got, you know, minimum viable product, hopefully operating, and people going through the system, and they've got paying customers. So they did some crystallizing, they did a pilot, they did a prototype, which they've just really finished the second run through that, and then duplications planned at another site, another regional geographic site, and then there'll be other geographic locations that will feed into the same social enterprise through technology. The people with a disability will be in different parts of Australia, but they can all be employed for a time through this social enterprise and then linked into other employment. So it enables people with a disability to be employed from home, and it enables them to be equals in their digital space, which is something that people with a disability strongly prefer, and where they can perform strongly. So that's a sort of a concrete example, and I don't know if anyone would like to ask any questions or engage with that example. I'll go on. Here's one at the incubation early stage level that's going to be external, and we're working with a global software house. They employ 14,000 Australians, and as such they feel their corporate social responsibility division is our customer, and they feel that they should be giving back to Indigenous Australians. One of their hopes is they're part of a global company, and this global company, one of the CSR things that they run is called 1 Billion Lives, and they compete every year. Every country puts forward its best idea on how they can transform difficult circumstances of people on the planet so that they can touch 1 billion lives positively. So our customer, CSR team in Australia, want to work with Indigenous Australians, and in working with Indigenous Australians come up with a fantastic social enterprise idea to win the 1 billion lives competition. So that's their particular problem, and that's their passion, and that's what they want to do. So in this case, we received a phone call from them because they knew that we worked with a number of Indigenous accelerators or incubators, and they'd found us. So that was a pretty easy referral for us. But as you start to become known in a certain space, you will get this as well, which is why I keep saying to you, focus on something and be known for that thing. And then the corporates will find you because they're really good at getting answers to problems they have. So once again, we did the ideation process with the team from Software House, our TDI team. Then we brought in another existing customer that we have called Indigenous Business Australia. So this is an example where we bring a lot of networking strength to the table, which this corporate wants as well. And because we've been working with IBA for a number of years, we could bring in a whole lot of very successful Indigenous social entrepreneurs. So again, in the room, in the ideation process, have the right people. And this is a real strength that you can bring from your network, and the corporate can bring some people as well. Again, we were finding the gold together, and in this case, this software house has a hackathon incubation stuff that they're really good. They call it Idea Factory. And so for once, TDI, we weren't using our processes. We said, yep, you bring your strength, we'll bring the Indigenous network and our strength in Indigenous social enterprise, but let's use your framework. And so the next stage, after we'd done some work there, is crystallising through interviews. And then in the end, what we're doing is where the idea and the pilot is that we're just keeping on using their idea factory and bringing in Indigenous social entrepreneurs until we find the best ideas to put forward for the 1 billion lives to win the money. And then they will actually start creating the solution. So watch this space. We haven't won the award yet, but we're hopeful. So again, does that make sense? Would people like to ask questions? That was our reputation in that case. And Keith and Will, I don't know if you've got some examples of incubation that you'd like to share.
This is actually Will. Chuli asked a question. She said, just curious, the ideation process started when they already wanted to collaborate. So in other words, did the ideation process start after they already wanted to collaborate, or was the ideation process with them happening before you actually formally started to collaborate? How was the transition from empathy interview to ideation process?
Yeah, great. Yeah, thanks. So in this case, they had a very, very clear idea of what they wanted to do. So they wanted to work with Indigenous Australians. They wanted to win the 1 Billion Lives award, and they wanted to allow the Indigenous entrepreneurs, along with their own team, dream up ideas. So we went fairly quickly to the ideation process, and given that they wanted to work with Indigenous Australia, we knew we had to bring some other people into the room. So when you sort of run that process, really depends on how much of a concrete idea you've got. So do you actually have to go out and get a whole lot of information first? Or is your customer saying, the corporate customer in this case, saying, no, we know what we want to do, so we just went to the next level? Does that, I hope that makes sense, Chuli. Type and come back if that's not okay. Otherwise, before we go on to accelerators, we might try pricing, but see if either Will or Keith want to give an example of working with corporates around incubation.
No, those are great examples, Liv. Nothing from me, and just a thanks from Chuli. So I think you've covered it. Okay,
so look, I'll have a bit of a crack at talking about pricing and see if we can answer. I think it was it Hien, Keith, who wanted to talk pricing?
Oh, that was Min. Yes, thank you.
Sorry, Min. So classically, when you're pricing a product or a service, whether it's yours to sell to the corporate or whether you're working with a social enterprise or the corporate, you want to think about cost pricing, and most of us don't know our costs well enough. So you really, really, really have to understand everything that you're paying for. And for us at TDI, our fixed overheads are staff salaries, for example. If we don't hit our 65% utilisation across the board of staff every month, our fixed overhead is all the staff time that wasn't utilised for billable hours that should have been. So sometimes our overheads are down around 20%, but if we haven't written enough work for a month, then our overheads go up. So how do you cost that? You have to look back, you have to look at your overheads, and you have to be real about it. You can't say, oh yeah, we're going to sell business every month, so our staff will always be fully billed. So you've really, so that's an example for us that it actually took us a little while to get our costs fully understood. Then if you want to, you can say, okay, we're going to put a price on it, which is our costs plus whatever margin we want to make. But then you actually have to look at the market and again say, what are our competitors charging? And it has to be that sophisticated view of competitors. Because if I'm going to go to a movie and it costs me $20 a ticket, but it's only $10 to hire the rollerblades for 2 hours, I might say to my family, hey, we can go rollerblading by the river twice, or we can see a movie and next week not go out. So you actually have to make sure that when you're doing market pricing, what are people paying for either a similar product or a similar experience or something that gives me the same gains, takes away the same pains, you know, so think about it in that sophisticated way. So firstly, are you going to price something cost plus profit? Are you going to price something based on market, what other people are charging, and either go a little bit under to get the business or go way above and set yourself as a premium product? Don't just undercut market necessarily. You might go way above. Don't go a few dollars over, actually go a whole level above and make the statement that you are the premium product. So when you're doing market pricing, you actually need to understand how people choose based on the kind of service that you're offering. It's not always about being the cheapest. And then finally, value pricing. So mostly at TDI, we encourage social enterprises to do value pricing, and that's the value to the customer, not the value of the good that you're doing, but the value of the product or the service to the customer. And usually the most robust price point is around value. And even if someone else is charging more or less, if you can communicate and advertise on value and reach those customers with a value offer, that's a fairly robust way to go. So that's that first side of pricing. The other side that I was just going to say, when you were hearing Will and Keith and I talking about all those conversations, you need to be really clear about what you're going to charge for the kind of work that you're landing, and you need to move as quickly as possible to charging. So that's why we're saying startup surveys and scouting might be something that you charge for. That's why we're saying design might be something that you charge for, because you're trying to limit what's free. You're trying to reduce what's free and get to charging as soon as possible. So you need to understand your hourly rate, your daily rate. You need to sort of back of the envelope being able to talk with people and work out approximately what things cost and your margin. And then when they're coming back and saying, well, this is the kind of resources we've got, the kind of time, the kind of things we can offer and the kind of money we've got, you need to be able to quickly learn to break down what you're offering and understand how long it might take you and what it's going to cost you, and be able to fairly quickly set a price on it. At least set a range and then go back to the office and work it out in detail. But the more you do that, the better you will get at setting a price that at the end of it, you go, yep, it cost us that much, plus we got our margin, plus we've set it at a value that they're really happy with. So Will, I'll hand over to you. Love to hear your take on pricing.
I don't know if there's anything much I'd add to that, Liv, to be honest. I think it was pretty comprehensive. I think it's really just about understanding a rate. And I think the thing that I would add is, in the context of your businesses where you're working with startups and you're typically not charging hourly rates, I think consider the corporate context as well, and consider what you can recoup of your costs. We always think about the extent to which you can recoup costs using things like value-based pricing for the amount of lead time that you put into the work to secure the client as well, and the other work that you do as well, which you're not able to charge rates for, hourly rates or daily rates for. So I think understanding your costs and then understanding corporate context and being able to build in a bit of buffer as well, because corporates typically, especially if you're dealing with a large corporate rather than a local SME, they have the ability to pay much higher rates. And so I'd take that into account with your pricing as well.
Yeah, great. And do some, again, this is where you go to certain companies and ask questions. You're not selling business, because you need to understand this. Tell me how much you tend to pay for. can we have a story about, let's talk about last time you were trying to solve something. Did you bring in consultants? How much did they charge? Talk me through that. You know, do you have friends inside some of these businesses where you can ask what kind of salaries people are on? And then, you know, comparing what you're offering, you need to compare yourself to a senior manager or an executive. Otherwise, you're not talking to the right people and you need to charge accordingly. So, yeah, you keep working that. And when you get a no based on price, that's a really good conversation to have, and you may have hit the ceiling and you may then want to come down. But most of us charge far too little to corporates, and they're just laughing all the way to the bank.
I'll throw an example in. At Spring, we were asked to do some corporate innovation work for a bank in Canada, and we quoted them what we thought was the right number, using a lot of the same variables that Liv and Will so accurately described. And then literally in the room, the bank looked at us and said, you know, how about we just pay you double? Because we think by the time you're done, you know, and it's true, they literally said, they said, because we think by the time you're done working with us, you'll have earned it all. And so...
Did you say, oh, thanks?
Yeah, exactly. So we said thank you and we'll take the money, and they were absolutely right. We did earn every penny. The one thing that I would add to what was shared is that there is a consideration in that if you have not done corporate work before, sometimes there is economic value to you having a case study customer. And so sometimes what you will do is you will price that first opportunity with a corporate so that you can actually say you have done corporate innovation. So it might be, I won't call it a discount, but what I often call it is a learning rate. So, you know, if your kind of standard hourly rate is $50 an hour, then, you know, maybe it's $25 an hour for this project. And then that way, what you can do is you can at least then cement in the marketplace that you've done it before, that you have legitimacy, that they can trust you. And the other piece too is often with corporates, you know, it's pretty rare that you'll do one project for a corporate and then never work with them again. And so, you know, as you build trust with a corporate, they love to work with suppliers that they know and they trust. So sometimes that first project, you could price it at a slightly lower amount to get the reference client, what we call a reference client. And then you'll do future work with them. And with the future work, you can charge more. And so it is important to note that you can also take that strategy in particular with the first corporate client you have.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Keith. Now we've got about 10 minutes left. So I'll skip on now to accelerators, which is, guys, all of us, this is our bread and butter. So really, this may be a fantastic selling point for you into corporates. Is there actually something that we can accelerate? Is there a whole, you know, group of people that we can bring together? And certainly this was our first large sales into corporates. So we were running an accelerator called 2 Feet, which, you know, just got some good press and people found out about it. And then we were approached by, the stuff I talked about earlier, started the conversation with Carnival Cruise Line and DFAT. And together with them, we created UME, which in the Pacific is UME in Pidgin. And we run an acceleration process. We're now in 6 ports throughout the Pacific. And in each port, we're there for about 6 months and then longer with measurement. And we start with scoping on the ground to look for either people who've got a little business or entrepreneurs. So the problem we are trying to solve, both for DFAT and Carnival Cruise Line, is that often expats from Australia or a Western country go and live in the Pacific, and they run tourism experiences for the people coming in on the cruises. So the Indigenous people, the Islander people through the Pacific, miss the opportunity or might be employed at a very low level at best in these tourism experiences that are being run by expats who come in to the islands. So both DFAT and Carnival Cruise Line said, we want to grow the wealth and the economy of the Islander people and of the islands. So we are working only with the Indigenous people of those islands. And Carnival Cruise Line has a very strict, what they call aggregator system. And until a tour or a tourism experience meets that standard and gets a certain number of points, they don't go live. But we now have in 3 ports, I think, we have between 2 and 6 tourism experiences in each port that are run by the Islander people, which is really exciting. And we've been able to, measure projected wealth and a whole lot of changes for people on those islands. And so that is meeting DFAT's aims of genuine development in those countries of the Indigenous people. And it makes Carnival Cruise Lines welcome in those ports rather than being seen as a bit of a parasite. So I don't know if anyone wants to ask any questions about that. I spoke about it earlier and how it came about and the conversations, and that it's a 3-way process. You can find out lots about UMI if you just type that into Google. We won a Shared Value Award here in Australia for it, and there's videos and there's all kinds of things that you can go and look at to find out anything else. Out of UMI, we got work with Indigenous Business Australia. So we're running an accelerator for them, which is early stage Indigenous social startups. And the problems that we're trying to solve there with IBA is Indigenous Business Australia is all about enabling Indigenous people to solve problems in their lives through more and more sophisticated engagement in business. So IBA is good at standard business, no good at entrepreneurship. So they came and found us after they'd had tried with 3 or 4 other organisations. So they came to us with some fatigue, with some things that they weren't happy about. And the key thing that we offered them is they're under 1 and 2, that because we're a social enterprise ourselves, we are much better at working with IBA and the Indigenous social entrepreneurs to really understand the roots of economic empowerment, to understand the oppression and the things, the colonial attitudes and the problems they're facing, and to work much more strongly towards self-directed living. We have built a whole thing called the 2 Worlds Businesses, that with every Indigenous social entrepreneur, we help them find their place in their Indigenous world and in mainstream Australia, and how they can start to integrate. They often feel incredibly lonely in both worlds. It's a very immature ecosystem, not a lot of successful Indigenous social entrepreneurs yet. So in this case, we do a 3-month pipeline every year before we run an accelerator to really try and find the right people and bring them out of the woodwork. And we make sure that our standard accelerator that we run, and very much you would have the strength of running an accelerator. What we do is we run a whole ancient learning lens over it, a whole power lens over it. So we talked a lot about gender. Some of it's gender, but a lot of it is just Western colonial attitudes. We really try and get a lot of input around a communal approach, and particularly with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, it's a real understanding of country and kinship that is needed. So we ran a pilot last year. We're about to start running it again this year. And through this work with IBA, we're now scoping what's called a remote accelerator in Outback Australia, in West Arnhem. We're also looking at a version of our UMI tourism accelerator across the top end of Australia. And we're looking at whether or not we can work with them in aged care for Indigenous Australians. So one idea, getting in the door getting trust with IBA, and then seeing there's all these other problems that they're facing that we might be able to help them with. So would anyone like to ask any questions there? And otherwise we might just have final sort of comments and wrap up, because it's 5:30. Sorry, it's 5:30 in my country.
Just got a thank you from Min for the great questions and or answers, sorry, and suggestions.
So Keith, I'm sorry, I'm going to leap over venture building. We might be able to include it in another thing that we do, because I just sort of want to finish on time. Just
great idea.
To cultivate the relationships over years. Start small. We've talked about offering a learning discount, prove yourself. Think really creatively. So you've seen there that DFAT are a co-sponsor. There might be other philanthropic or donors that you can bring in. Charge commercial rates, get out there and understand what they are, and dream big. You really, really have skills that this sector needs. So believe in yourself. You're taking something really valuable to the table, and we can make the world a better place by working with commercials. So Keith, over to you. Do you want to talk about the next session?
Yeah, I would love to. So just very quickly, everybody, as we wrap, next week's session is actually what we call a seminar. And in that particular session, Liv and myself and Sana will basically have an open Q&A session where we'll be able to dig into the current state of where you guys are at with financial sustainability. We will be able to answer any challenges or examples that you're working with. Min's example of the corporate was a really good one. And we can work through those in a collaborative way next week. So next week, no topic, but it will be Q&A and problem solving to help you guys move the ball forward. Thanks, Liv.
Great. Well, thanks, guys. Thanks for your time, and thanks for your engagement, bringing both the experiences that you've had and asking great questions. Really appreciate it, and it's just really encouraging to keep meeting and keep talking. So we'll see you next week. I actually am meeting with that Indigenous social enterprise team. So if I'm a bit late to the seminar, that'll be why. So thanks, guys. Will, any last words needed from Frontier Incubators?
Not at all. Just a huge thanks to Liv and Keith and everyone for joining the call.
Great, guys. Wherever you are in the world, enjoy your evening, morning, afternoon, whatever it is, and we'll be in touch and see each other soon. Keep putting questions or resources into the Slack channel. Bless you all. See you guys.
Thanks all.